Jack Henderson, a retired Navy pilot, lived peacefully on his ranch, a few miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. His days were simple now, working on his old planes, tending to the airstrip he had built years ago. It had been his refuge since leaving the military, a place where he could leave the chaos of war behind. But peace, Jack knew, was never permanent. That peace was shattered one afternoon when a convoy of trucks pulled onto his property. The lead truck stopped near the airstrip, and several cartel thugs stepped out. Their leader, a young man with a cocky grin, sauntered toward Jack. He was tall and muscular, with a tattoo of a serpent winding down his arm. "Jack Henderson, right?" the man said, grinning. "You've got a nice place here." Jack didn't respond right away. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, calmly observing the men who now surrounded his property. "What do you want?" Jack finally asked, his voice low and steady. The thug's grin widened. "We need this airstrip. You let us use it, and we'll make sure you stay safe. You say no, well, accidents can happen." Jack took a step forward, meeting the man's gaze. "I'm not scared of you. Get off my land." The thug laughed. "Oh, tough guy. Huh? You're just some old Navy pilot. This isn't a war zone, Grandpa." He turned to his men. "Look at him. Thinks he's still in charge of a squadron or something." The cartel members laughed and began vandalizing Jack's property. They spray-painted the hangar door and knocked over tools. Jack clenched his fists but didn't react. He knew this was a tactic. Push him until he broke, force him to fear them. But Jack Henderson wasn't a man who gave in to fear. One of the thugs walked toward an old plane parked near the airstrip. It was a P-51 Mustang, a relic from Jack's collection. "Hey, boss," the thug called out. "How about we torch this thing?" "Don't touch that," Jack said, his voice suddenly sharp. The leader smirked. "Oh, you care about this hunk of junk? Maybe we'll take it for a ride. Or better yet, blow it up. See how tough you are then." Jack's mind raced. He knew he couldn't take them all head-on. He needed to be smart, patient. "You've made your point. Now leave." "Sure, old man," the thug said, chuckling. "But we'll be back. And when we come back, you'd better say yes." The convoy drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Jack stared at the graffiti on his hangar door and the damage to his tools. This wasn't just a threat. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. That evening, Jack sat alone in his workshop, staring at an old radio tucked in the corner. It had been years since he had used it to contact his former squadron. But tonight, he had no choice. He hesitated for a moment, then tuned the frequency. Static filled the room, followed by a familiar voice. "This is Falcon. Who's calling?" "Dan, it's Jack Henderson," he said, his voice steady. There was a brief pause, then excitement broke through the static. "Jack? It's been years. What's going on?" "I've got a situation," Jack explained. "Cartel's trying to take over my ranch. They want my airstrip for their smuggling operations." "Dan, Falcon," Harris's tone shifted immediately. "They picked the wrong target. You need the squad?" "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "It's time to fly again." "Consider it done," Dan replied. "We'll gather the team." Jack leaned back in his chair, a rare sense of relief washing over him. The cartel thought he was an easy target. They were about to learn that Jack Henderson was far from defenseless. The next morning, Jack heard the distant rumble of motorcycles and trucks. His old squadron was arriving. Dan Harris was the first to step out of his vehicle, followed by other veterans who had served alongside Jack in conflicts across the world. "Looks like you've been busy," Dan said, glancing at the vandalized hangar. "They think I'm weak because I'm retired," Jack said. Dan smirked. "We'll show them what retired Navy pilots can do." The morning air was cool and crisp as Jack and his old squadron gathered near the damaged hangar. Dan, Falcon, Harris, Jack's longtime wingman, inspected the graffiti on the door and shook his head. "Looks like they were trying to make a statement," Dan said. Jack crossed his arms. "They think intimidation will work. They don't realize who they're dealing with." Dan grinned. "They'll learn soon enough." Jack's mechanic, Emma Rodriguez, arrived with a toolkit in hand. She had worked on Jack's planes for years and wasn't about to stand by while the cartel tried to take over. "Let's clean this up," Emma said, gesturing to the vandalized hangar. I've already ordered new parts for the airstrip lights. We'll be operational again in no time. As they worked, Jack and the squadron laid out a plan. The first step was to gather intel on the cartel's movements. Jack wasn't going to sit back and wait for the next attack. He wanted to strike first. While Jack and Emma worked on the airstrip, one of the squadron members, Mike "Hawk" Jensen, patrolled the perimeter on an ATV. His years in reconnaissance made him keenly aware of his surroundings. "Hawk, what's your status?" Jack's voice came through the radio. "Got movement near the tree line," Hawk replied. "Looks like a scout. He's trying to stay hidden." Jack grabbed his rifle and signaled to Dan, "Let's check it out." The two men moved quietly through the trees, flanking the scout's position. Max, Dan's military-trained K9, accompanied them, his ears perked and body tense. Within minutes, they spotted the cartel scout crouching behind some bushes, binoculars in hand. Jack stepped forward, weapon raised. "Drop the binoculars. Now." The scout froze, then slowly raised his hands. Okay, don't shoot." Dan approached and pulled the scout to his feet. "You're on private property. Start talking." The scout stammered, "They sent me to watch the place. Eduardo Cortez is in charge now. He wants to know how many people you have." "Eduardo," Jack muttered. He remembered the name from his research, Miguel and Raul's cousin, known for his brutality. "You're going to tell us everything," Dan said. Back at the hangar, the scout spilled what he knew. Eduardo was regrouping after Raul's capture, pulling in reinforcements and planning to take control of all local smuggling routes. "They've got multiple airstrips hidden in the desert," the scout revealed. "They're using small planes to move drugs across the border. Eduardo thinks your airstrip is perfect for expanding the operation." Jack exchanged a look with Dan. "We need eyes on those airstrips." "Agreed," Dan said. "If we can disrupt their supply lines, they'll lose their advantage." Jack turned to Emma. "Get the drone ready. We're going on a recon mission." Emma nodded. "I'll set up a live feed. Let's see how far their operation stretches." Back at the hangar, the scout spilled what he knew. Eduardo was regrouping after Raul's capture, pulling in reinforcements and planning to take control of all local smuggling routes. "They've got multiple airstrips hidden in the desert," the scout revealed. "They're using small planes to move drugs across the border. Eduardo thinks your airstrip is perfect for expanding the operation." Jack exchanged a look with Dan. "We need eyes on those airstrips." "Agreed," Dan said. "If we can disrupt their supply lines, they'll lose their advantage." Jack turned to Emma. "Get the drone ready. We're going on a recon mission." Emma nodded. "I'll set up a live feed. Let's see how far their operation stretches." That afternoon, Emma launched the drone from the ranch's airstrip. Jack, Dan, and the rest of the squadron watched the live feed on a large screen in the hangar. The drone soared high above the desert, scanning for signs of cartel activity. "There," Emma said, zooming in on a cluster of vehicles near a remote dirt airstrip. Small planes were being loaded with crates, while armed guards patrolled the area. "They're moving product fast," Dan observed. "We'll have to hit them before they relocate." Jack nodded. "We'll take out the planes and supplies in one strike. But first, we need to gather more intel on their defenses." Emma marked several key points on the map. "I'll keep the drone in the air to track their movements. We'll be ready when the time comes." Unbeknownst to Jack and his team, Eduardo was already growing suspicious. One of his lieutenants approached him at their base. "Boss, one of our scouts hasn't reported back," the lieutenant said. Eduardo frowned. "Henderson got to him." "We should pull back for now," the lieutenant suggested. "He's got more men than we expected." Eduardo slammed his fist on the table. "No, we're not retreating. Double the patrols. I want eyes on that ranch 24/7. The cartel was preparing for an all-out confrontation, but Jack's squadron was ready for them. As night fell, Jack gathered the squadron for a final briefing. "We know where their airstrips are and what they're planning. Tomorrow, we hit them where it hurts." Dan raised his fist. "They started this fight. We're going to finish it." The team dispersed to their positions, knowing the next day would determine the fate of the ranch. Max trotted beside Jack, sensing the rising tension. "Get some rest," Jack said to the dog. "We'll need all the strength we've got." Max barked softly in response. Jack stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The cartel thought they could control him. Tomorrow, they would learn what it meant to challenge a squadron of veterans. The following morning dawned with an eerie calm. Jack knew it wouldn't last. The intel from the captured scout confirmed what he had suspected. Eduardo Cortez was determined to take the ranch by force. Jack's squadron had faced overwhelming odds before, but this time, they were fighting on their home turf. Standing on the porch, Jack surveyed the land with a keen eye. Emma was already on the airstrip, checking the drone's battery and camera feed. Max prowled the perimeter, alert to any signs of danger. Dan walked over, tightening the straps of his tactical gear. "Everyone's in position," Dan reported. Hawks got overwatch on the hill, and the rest of the squads patrolling the south and east fences. Emma's keeping an eye on the drone feed. "Good," Jack said. "The moment they make a move, we'll know." The drone's camera picked up movement near the cartel's airstrip in the desert. Several trucks were pulling away, heading toward the mountains. Emma zoomed in on the footage. "Dad, I think they're pulling out," Emma said through the radio. "They're leaving the airstrip." Dan frowned. "That's too easy. Why would they abandon their smuggling routes now?" Jack nodded in agreement. "They're up to something. This might be a trick to draw us out." "Should we still hit the airstrip?" Emma asked. "Not yet," Jack replied. "Let's see what they do next. Keep tracking them." The drone followed the convoy as it wound its way through the desert. Jack and Dan studied the map, looking for potential ambush points. "They're heading toward the ridge," Jack said. "If they double back, they could hit us from the north." "They're trying to outflank us," Dan muttered. "Smart, but not smart enough." As the squad monitored the drone feed, Hawk radioed in from his position on the hill. His voice was tense. "Jack, we've got a problem. I'm seeing movement in the forest to the west. Looks like they've got another group circling around." Jack clenched his jaw. So that's their plan. The convoy was a distraction. "Damn," Dan muttered. "They're hitting us from multiple angles." "Everyone, stay sharp," Jack said over the radio. "Hawk, keep eyes on the western group. Emma, redirect the drone to cover the north and east. We're not letting them box us in." The early morning haze began to lift as the squad prepared for a coordinated response. The cartel's tactics were clear now. They were trying to overwhelm Jack's defenses from multiple directions. The drone captured the convoy splitting up, with trucks heading to the northern ridge and another group closing in from the western forest. Jack's team needed to act fast. Standing near the hangar, Jack gave final orders. "They're trying to spread us thin. We counter by tightening our defenses. No one moves without backup." "Dan, Falcon," Harris cracked his knuckles. "Let's give them a reason to regret this." "Emma, keep monitoring both groups," Jack added. "We'll block their routes and force them to retreat." "Got it," Emma replied, her fingers flying over the controls as she redirected the drone. Max barked at her side, sensing the rising tension. The cartel convoy advancing from the northern ridge expected no resistance. They moved steadily along the dirt trail, their armed guards scanning the area. But Jack and his team had anticipated this move. Hawk had repositioned to a vantage point overlooking the trail, providing overwatch for the ambush. "Targets approaching the choke point," Hawk reported. 5 vehicles, 15 men. "Wait for my signal," Jack replied. He and Dan were hidden behind a series of boulders, along with 2 other squad members. They watched as the convoy came into view. The lead truck slowed as it neared a barricade the squad had placed earlier. One of the guards stepped out, approaching cautiously. "Now," Jack whispered. Hawk fired the first shot, taking out the guard with surgical precision. Simultaneously, Jack's team opened fire from both sides of the trail. The cartel soldiers scrambled for cover, but the ambush was too well coordinated. Within minutes, the convoy was in disarray. "They're falling back," Dan shouted as the remaining cartel soldiers retreated into the hills. "Let them run," Jack said calmly. "We've cut off their northern route. That'll slow them down." Just as Jack's team regrouped, Emma's voice came through the radio with an urgent warning. "Dad, another group is moving fast from the west. They're heading straight for the airstrip." Jack's stomach tightened. The airstrip was crucial to their defense. If the cartel captured it, they'd have a staging point for reinforcements. "Falcon, take your team back to the ranch," Jack ordered. "Emma, Keep Max with you. I'm heading to the airstrip now. Dan nodded and motioned for his men to move. We'll hold the perimeter. Jack sprinted toward the airstrip, his mind racing. He couldn't let the cartel take control of the field. As he neared the hangar, he saw several trucks speeding toward the main runway. Emma watched the scene unfold on the drone feed, her heart pounding. Dad, they're almost there. You need to hurry. I see them, Jack replied, his voice calm despite the situation. He positioned himself near the hangar, using the planes for cover. Max barked furiously, standing guard at Emma's side. He sensed the danger approaching and refused to leave her post. Realizing he was outnumbered, Jack made a bold decision. He ran to the hangar and powered up one of the old planes, a small, agile Cessna he had restored years ago. Emma, I'm taking off, Jack said over the radio. What? Dad, are you sure? They're not expecting air support, Jack replied. Time to remind them who I am. The plane roared to life, its propellers spinning rapidly. Jack taxied onto the runway as cartel soldiers tried to intercept him. Gunfire pinged off the plane's fuselage, but Jack remained focused. He accelerated, lifting off just as the cartel reached the runway. Hell yeah! Dan cheered over the radio. That's the Jack Henderson I remember. From the sky, Jack had a clear view of the battlefield. He circled back toward the airstrip, lining up his approach. The cartel soldiers were caught off guard, scattering as Jack swooped low, the plane's engine roaring overhead. Emma directed the drone to mark key targets. Dad, they've regrouped near the fuel depot. Copy that, Jack said, banking sharply. He dropped a makeshift flash grenade near the depot, disorienting the enemy. Dan's ground team seized the opportunity to push forward, driving the cartel off the property. Within minutes, the airstrip was secure once more. The cartel's plan had failed. As the dust settled, Jack landed the plane and taxied back to the hangar. Emma ran to meet him, followed by Max. You're crazy, you know that? Emma said, half laughing, half scolding. Maybe, Jack replied with a grin, climbing out of the cockpit, but it worked. Dan walked over, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, I missed flying with you. That was something else. We're not done yet, Jack said. They'll regroup and come back with everything they've got. We need to stay ahead of them. Dan nodded. Then we keep pushing. They won't get another chance to hit us like this. As the squad prepared for the next phase, Jack looked toward the horizon. The cartel had underestimated them once again. Next time, they wouldn't just defend. They'd go on the offensive. The sun rose over Jack's ranch, casting a golden glow over the repaired airstrip and hangar. The squad gathered for a morning briefing, their faces serious and determined. The cartel had tried to take them by surprise twice, but now it was time to strike back. Jack wasn't going to wait for Eduardo Cortez to mount another attack. Dan, Falcon, Harris stood beside a large map of the region, marking key cartel-controlled locations with red pins. We've confirmed 3 major sites, 2 airstrips, and a supply depot in the desert. If we take those out, they'll lose their smuggling routes and supplies. Which one's their weakest point? Jack asked. The northern airstrip, Hawk answered. Fewer guards, but it's critical to their operations. If we hit it fast, we can cripple them before they even realize we're there. Jack nodded. We'll take it out tonight. Emma, you'll manage the drone surveillance. Falcon, your team will provide ground support. Let's move. The squad broke off to prepare. This was no longer about defending the ranch. It was about eliminating the threat once and for all. As Jack and the team made their final preparations, Carlos, one of their captured cartel scouts, approached nervously. You're planning to hit the northern airstrip, right? Carlos asked. Jack studied him carefully. Why do you care? Carlos hesitated. Eduardo knows. He's sending reinforcements there. If you attack now, you'll walk into an ambush. Dan crossed his arms. How do we know you're not lying to protect your boss? I'm not, Carlos insisted. Look, I don't want any part of this anymore. I just want out. If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't have warned you. Jack exchanged a glance with Dan and Emma. The scout's warning couldn't be ignored. Okay, Jack said. We'll verify it. But if you're lying, I'm not, Carlos said quickly. Just be careful. Emma immediately redirected the drone toward the northern airstrip. Within minutes, the live feed confirmed Carlos's story. Several trucks and heavily armed cartel soldiers were arriving at the site, fortifying the area. Looks like he was telling the truth, Emma said. They're digging in, Dan muttered. We'll need a new plan. We adapt, Jack said. If they're focused on that airstrip, it means their other sites are vulnerable. We'll hit the supply depot instead. As Jack and the team made their final preparations, Carlos, one of their captured cartel scouts, approached nervously. You're planning to hit the northern airstrip, right? Carlos asked. Jack studied him carefully. Why do you care? Carlos hesitated. Eduardo knows. He's sending reinforcements there. If you attack now, you'll walk into an ambush. Dan crossed his arms. How do we know you're not lying to protect your boss? I'm not, Carlos insisted. Look, I don't want any part of this anymore. I just want out. If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't have warned you. Jack exchanged a glance with Dan and Emma. The scout's warning couldn't be ignored. Okay, Jack said. We'll verify it. But if you're lying, I'm not, Carlos said quickly. Just be careful. Emma immediately redirected the drone toward the northern airstrip. Within minutes, the live feed confirmed Carlos's story. Several trucks and heavily armed cartel soldiers were arriving at the site, fortifying the area. Looks like he was telling the truth, Emma said. They're digging in, Dan muttered. We'll need a new plan. We adapt, Jack said. If they're focused on that airstrip, it means their other sites are vulnerable. We'll hit the supply depot instead. To keep the cartel focused on the northern airstrip, Jack decided to launch a diversion. Emma remotely piloted the drone to simulate a scouting operation near the airstrip, drawing the cartel's attention. On the ground, cartel radios crackled with tension. They've got drones overhead, one guard reported. Hold your positions, Eduardo's lieutenant ordered. They're probably planning an attack. Stay alert. The cartel doubled down on their defenses, unaware that Jack's real target was their supply depot miles away. This should keep them busy, Jack said as he led his team toward the desert. Under the cover of darkness, Jack's squad moved swiftly toward the supply depot. The facility was poorly guarded compared to the airstrip, with only a handful of men patrolling the perimeter. Looks like they spread themselves too thin, Dan whispered as they approached. Let's keep it quiet, Jack replied. We hit hard, disable their supplies, and get out before they can call for backup. Hawk climbed a nearby tower to provide overwatch, while Max prowled silently beside Jack. The team positioned themselves near the main storage area. Emma's voice came through the radio. You've got 2 guards near the fuel tanks. Take them out quietly. Jack gave the signal. 2 squad members moved in, taking down the guards without a sound. The team then planted explosives near key supply points, fuel tanks, crates of weapons, and communication equipment. Back at the northern airstrip, Eduardo's lieutenant received a frantic call from the depot. They're hitting the supply site. What? I thought they were coming here, the lieutenant shouted. They tricked us. We're losing everything. Fuel, weapons, all of it. Eduardo slammed his fist on the hood of a truck. Damn Henderson. He's always one step ahead. Should we send reinforcements to the depot? The lieutenant asked. It's too late, Eduardo growled. But we're not done. Prepare the rest of the men. We'll crush them at the ranch. Meanwhile, Jack's team completed their sabotage. The supply depot erupted in flames as the explosives detonated, lighting up the desert night. Mission accomplished, Dan reported. Let's get out of here, Jack ordered. The squad retreated into the darkness as cartel reinforcements scrambled to respond. The destruction of the supply depot had an unexpected side effect. Several key communication towers went offline, leaving the cartel unable to coordinate their forces effectively. Eduardo's blind, Emma said, monitoring intercepted cartel radio chatter. They've lost contact with half their units. Perfect, Jack said. Now we finish this. The squad returned to the ranch, knowing they had dealt a significant blow to the cartel's operations. The balance of power had shifted, and the enemy was running out of options. Jack stood on the airstrip, watching the flames in the distance. For the first time in days, he felt like they were gaining control of the situation. But he also knew Eduardo wouldn't back down easily. They're going to come at us with everything they have, Dan said, echoing Jack's thoughts. Let them try, Jack replied. We've got the advantage now. They won't win. Max stood beside him, ears perked, ready for the next fight. The war wasn't over yet, but Jack was determined to end it on his terms. The cartel was reeling from the destruction of their supply depot. The flames could still be seen in the distance as Jack and his squad regrouped at the ranch. They had hit Eduardo Cortez where it hurt most, crippling his smuggling operation. But Jack knew this wouldn't be the end. Eduardo was furious. He wouldn't retreat. He would come for the ranch with every resource he had left. Emma, keep the drone up. I want a full perimeter scan, Jack ordered as the team reviewed their defenses. On it, Emma said, launching the drone into the sky. Max stayed by her side, pacing restlessly. Dan leaned against a fence post, tightening the strap on his tactical vest. You know Eduardo's going to go all in now. He doesn't have much left to lose. That's exactly why he's dangerous, Jack replied. Desperation makes men reckless. At a hidden base deep in the desert, Eduardo paced angrily, barking orders at his remaining lieutenants. We've lost too much already. We can't afford another failure. One of the lieutenants hesitated. Boss, we're stretched thin. We don't have enough men to launch another attack. Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Then we'll bring in outside help. I still have contacts with the syndicate across the border. Call them. I want reinforcements here by tomorrow. The lieutenant nodded and made the call. Within hours, reinforcements were mobilizing. Eduardo was determined to crush Jack and reclaim control of the region. Back at the ranch, Jack's radio crackled with static as Sheriff Walker checked in. Jack, I've got intel you'll want to hear, Walker said. Eduardo's calling for backup. He's not done with you. Jack sighed but remained calm. How many? Could be a couple dozen more men, maybe heavy weapons, Walker replied. I'm pulling in some deputies, but we'll need time to get them to your location. Time's not something we have, Jack said. We'll hold until you get here. You sure about that? Walker asked. We've handled worse, Jack replied. At a hidden base deep in the desert, Eduardo paced angrily, barking orders at his remaining lieutenants. We've lost too much already. We can't afford another failure. One of the lieutenants hesitated. Boss, we're stretched thin. We don't have enough men to launch another attack. Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Then we'll bring in outside help. I still have contacts with the syndicate across the border. Call them. I want reinforcements here by tomorrow. The lieutenant nodded and made the call. Within hours, reinforcements were mobilizing. Eduardo was determined to crush Jack and reclaim control of the region. Back at the ranch, Jack's radio crackled with static as Sheriff Walker checked in. Jack, I've got intel you'll want to hear, Walker said. Eduardo's calling for backup. He's not done with you. Jack sighed but remained calm. How many? Could be a couple dozen more men, maybe heavy weapons, Walker replied. I'm pulling in some deputies, but we'll need time to get them to your location. Time's not something we have, Jack said. We'll hold until you get here. You sure about that? Walker asked. We've handled worse, Jack replied. At a hidden base deep in the desert, Eduardo paced angrily, barking orders at his remaining lieutenants. We've lost too much already. We can't afford another failure. One of the lieutenants hesitated. Boss, we're stretched thin. We don't have enough men to launch another attack. Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Then we'll bring in outside help. I still have contacts with the syndicate across the border. Call them. I want reinforcements here by tomorrow. The lieutenant nodded and made the call. Within hours, reinforcements were mobilizing. Eduardo was determined to crush Jack and reclaim control of the region. Back at the ranch, Jack's radio crackled with static as Sheriff Walker checked in. Jack, I've got intel you'll want to hear, Walker said. Eduardo's calling for backup. He's not done with you. Jack sighed but remained calm. How many? Could be a couple dozen more men, maybe heavy weapons, Walker replied. I'm pulling in some deputies, but we'll need time to get them to your location. Time's not something we have, Jack said. We'll hold until you get here. You sure about that? Walker asked. We've handled worse, Jack replied. At a hidden base deep in the desert, Eduardo paced angrily, barking orders at his remaining lieutenants. We've lost too much already. We can't afford another failure. One of the lieutenants hesitated. Boss, we're stretched thin. We don't have enough men to launch another attack. Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Then we'll bring in outside help. I still have contacts with the syndicate across the border. Call them. I want reinforcements here by tomorrow. The lieutenant nodded and made the call. Within hours, reinforcements were mobilizing. Eduardo was determined to crush Jack and reclaim control of the region. Back at the ranch, Jack's radio crackled with static as Sheriff Walker checked in. "Jack, I've got intel you'll want to hear," Walker said. "Eduardo's calling for backup. He's not done with you." Jack sighed but remained calm. "How many?" "Could be a couple dozen more men, maybe heavy weapons," Walker replied. "I'm pulling in some deputies, but we'll need time to get them to your location." "Time's not something we have," Jack said. "We'll hold until you get here." "You sure about that?" Walker asked. "We've handled worse," Jack replied. Emma's drone soared high above the landscape, scanning for signs of movement. Her eyes widened as the feed showed several vehicles advancing through a dry creek bed near the eastern edge of the property. "Dad, we've got a convoy coming from the east," Emma reported. "They're trying to sneak around the main road." Jack and Dan moved to the control station, studying the footage. "They're hiding in the terrain to avoid detection," Dan said. "Smart, but not smart enough." Jack grabbed his radio. "Hawk, take a team and intercept them near the eastern ridge. They'll never see it coming." "On my way," Hawk responded. Emma continued tracking the convoy, providing real-time updates. "They're about to hit a choke point," she said. "Perfect," Jack muttered. Hawk's team reached the ridge just as the convoy entered the narrow creek bed. The squad had already prepared several traps along the route, including hidden explosives and strategically placed sniper positions. "Targets in position," Hawk said over the radio. "Light 'em up," Jack ordered. The first explosion rocked the canyon walls, flipping the lead vehicle onto its side. The cartel soldiers scrambled to escape as gunfire erupted from both sides of the ridge. Hawk's team cut off their retreat, taking out the rear vehicles and trapping the convoy in a deadly crossfire. Within minutes, the convoy was neutralized. Hawk reported back with a hint of satisfaction. "Convoy's down. No survivors." "Good work," Jack said. "Get back to the ranch. We're not done yet." Despite losing the convoy, Eduardo pressed forward. His reinforcements arrived that evening, bringing trucks loaded with armed men and heavy weapons. This was his last chance to take the ranch, and he intended to leave nothing standing. "We move at sundown," Eduardo growled. "Burn everything." At the ranch, Jack's squad made final preparations. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, sandbags reinforced weak points, and defensive positions were manned by veterans who had fought in far worse conditions. "We've got them right where we want them," Dan said, adjusting his rifle sights. "They think they're in control," Jack replied. "They're wrong." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack climbed onto the roof of the hangar with his binoculars. In the distance, he saw the cartel trucks moving in formation. The battle for the ranch was about to begin. "Positions!" Jack barked into the radio. The squad took their places, weapons at the ready. Max stood beside Emma near the control station, growling softly. Emma's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They're coming, Dad." "I see them," Jack said. "Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong people." The floodlights clicked on, illuminating the approaching convoy. Eduardo's men hesitated for a moment, taken off guard by the sudden glare. That hesitation was all Jack needed. "Open fire," he commanded. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the property. The battle for the ranch had begun in full force. The sound of gunfire echoed across the ranch as Eduardo Cortez's men launched their final assault. The floodlights around the property cast long, shifting shadows over the fields. From his position on the roof of the hangar, Jack could see cartel trucks trying to push through the main entrance. Their headlights cut through the darkness, but the defensive barricades and gunfire forced them to slow. "Falcon, they're testing the main gate," Jack radioed. "Yeah, I see him," Dan responded. "We'll hold them here." Max growled low at Emma's side as gunshots rang out closer to the house. Emma guided the drone overhead, providing Jack and the squad with an aerial view of the enemy's positions. "Dad, they're sending more guys toward the southern fence," Emma warned. "It's a flanking move." "Falcon, pull a team to cover the south," Jack ordered. "We're on it," Dan replied. As Jack scanned the battlefield, a new threat appeared. A cartel truck fitted with a mounted heavy machine gun rumbled toward the barricades. The weapon roared to life, shredding a section of sandbags and pinning down several of the bikers. "Damn it, they've got heavy weapons," Dan shouted over the radio. "We're pinned at the gate." Jack reacted quickly. "Emma, give me a targeting marker on that truck." Emma shifted the drone's camera, locking onto the vehicle. "You're marked, Dad." Jack climbed into the cockpit of the old Cessna parked near the hangar. The engine roared to life as he taxied onto the runway. He wasn't about to let the cartel control the battlefield. "Falcon, hold your ground," Jack said through the radio. "I'll take care of that truck." The plane accelerated down the airstrip, lifting off into the night sky. Jack banked sharply, lining up a low pass over the main gate. As he approached, he saw the mounted gun blazing at his squad below. "Not for long," Jack muttered. He dipped the plane low and released a makeshift smoke grenade directly over the truck. The sudden burst of smoke and noise disoriented the gunner, giving Dan's team an opening. "Go now," Dan shouted. His squad fired in unison, taking out the gunner and disabling the truck. "Truck's down," Dan confirmed. Despite the loss of the truck, Eduardo's forces made progress elsewhere. A group of cartel soldiers cut through the southern fence and began advancing toward the airstrip. Emma spotted them on the drone feed and radioed Jack. "Dad, they broke through the fence. About 15 of them are moving toward the hangar." Jack cursed under his breath. "I'm coming around for another pass. Falcon, can you spare anyone to reinforce the airstrip?" "We're stretched thin," Dan replied. "We'll try to reposition, but it'll take time." Jack knew they couldn't let the cartel take the hangar. It was a critical point of defense, and if the enemy secured it, they could launch further attacks from inside. "Emma, stay inside and lock the doors," Jack ordered. "Max, stay with her." Emma nodded, her face tense. "Okay, but be careful, Dad." Jack made a sharp turn and dove toward the advancing cartel soldiers. The sound of his engine caused panic among the attackers, forcing them to scatter. Jack fired flares toward the ground, illuminating their positions for the squad on the ground. Dan's voice came through the radio. "We're hitting them now." The squad moved in from the flanks, taking advantage of the confusion. Within minutes, the cartel soldiers were either dead or retreating. "Airstrip secure," Dan reported. "For now," Jack replied, bringing the plane in for a landing. "Let's regroup." Back at the main gate, Eduardo's convoy arrived. Stepping out of his truck, Eduardo surveyed the battlefield with cold fury. His men had taken significant losses, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Push forward," Eduardo ordered. "Take the house. Burn everything if you have to." His men, motivated by fear and desperation, launched an aggressive assault. They fired RPGs at the barricades, causing massive explosions that shook the ground. Dan's voice came over the radio. "We're taking heavy fire, Jack. They've got RPGs. Pull back to secondary positions," Jack ordered. "Emma, get that drone back over the gate. We need targeting support." "I'm on it," Emma replied, guiding the drone toward the front lines. The camera captured Eduardo shouting orders, his presence boosting the morale of his troops. "There he is," Emma said. "Eduardo's leading them." Jack clenched his jaw. This was the moment they had been waiting for. As the battle intensified, a small team of cartel soldiers attempted to sneak around the airstrip, aiming to ambush the defenders from the rear. Max, however, was already on their trail. The German shepherd moved swiftly and silently through the tall grass, his senses locked on the intruders. He lunged at the first soldier, knocking him to the ground and disarming him in a single motion. The other soldiers panicked, firing blindly into the darkness. Emma watched the drone feed and saw Max engaging the enemy. "Max just took down one of the attackers," she exclaimed over the radio. "Good boy," Jack said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Keep him safe, Emma." The remaining soldiers fled, unwilling to face both the squad and Max. With Eduardo's forces disorganized and retreating in multiple directions, Jack saw his chance. "Falcon, push them back. We've got them on the ropes." "Roger that," Dan replied. "Let's finish this." The squad launched a final counterattack, driving the cartel soldiers off the property. Explosions and gunfire echoed one last time before the ranch fell quiet. Eduardo, realizing he was beaten, fled in one of the remaining trucks. "Cowards running," Dan muttered. "We'll deal with him soon enough," Jack replied. "For now, secure the area." The squad regrouped near the hangar, exhausted but victorious. Max trotted up to Jack, wagging his tail proudly. "You earned your keep tonight," Jack said, scratching the dog behind the ears. Emma ran up and hugged her father. "We did it, Dad. They're gone." "For now," Jack said, "but we're ready if they come back." The team stood together under the floodlights, knowing that they had defended their home against overwhelming odds. The battlefield had fallen silent. Fires smoldered in the distance as the remaining cartel forces fled into the night. Jack's squad regrouped near the hangar, battered but alive. Despite their victory, Jack knew the fight wasn't over. Eduardo had escaped, and as long as he was free, the threat to the ranch remained. "Dan, Falcon," Harris approached Jack, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. Eduardo ran with his tail between his legs. "We should track him down before he can regroup." Jack nodded. "We need to end this now. If we let him go, he'll come back stronger." Sheriff Walker's voice crackled over the radio. "Jack, I just got word. Eduardo's convoy is heading west, toward the Canyon Pass. My deputies are setting up roadblocks, but you might catch him first if you move fast." "We're on it," Jack replied. He turned to the team. "Gear up. We're taking the fight to Eduardo." Miles away, Eduardo's convoy sped through the desert, kicking up a thick trail of dust. He leaned forward in his seat, barking orders into a handheld radio. "Get us to the safe house," he shouted. "We need to regroup and call in reinforcements." His lieutenant, seated beside him, hesitated. "Reinforcements? Boss, after what happened tonight, I don't think anyone's coming." Eduardo glared at him. "Then we hold the safe house and prepare for a counterstrike." "I'm not going down like this." The convoy raced through a narrow canyon, unaware that Jack's squad was closing in. Emma monitored the drone feed from the back of a truck as Jack, Dan, and the rest of the squad pursued the fleeing cartel vehicles. "Dad, the canyon splits ahead," Emma said over the radio. "There's a narrow route you can use to cut them off." Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. "Falcon, take Hawk's team and head for the right pass. We'll block the main route." "Copy that," Dan responded. The squad split into two groups, their vehicles roaring across the rugged terrain. Hawk's team climbed to a high ridge overlooking the canyon, setting up an ambush point. "They're coming your way," Emma reported. "Be ready." Jack's truck skidded to a stop at the entrance to the canyon. He jumped out, rifle in hand, and took cover behind a large boulder. The sound of engines echoed through the narrow pass. "Here they come," Jack muttered. The lead cartel truck rounded a bend, its headlights illuminating Jack's position. Before the driver could react, Hawk fired a shot that shattered the windshield. The truck veered off the path and slammed into a rock wall. "Ambush!" a cartel soldier yelled as gunfire erupted from both sides of the canyon. Jack and his team moved swiftly, taking down the disoriented cartel forces. The convoy came to a grinding halt as more vehicles were disabled. Amid the chaos, Eduardo abandoned his truck and scrambled up a rocky incline, desperate to escape. He clutched a pistol in one hand, his breathing ragged. "Falcon, Eduardo's on foot," Jack called out. "We need him alive." "Understood," Dan replied. "Hawk, keep him in your sights." Hawk spotted Eduardo climbing higher up the canyon wall. "I've got eyes on him. He's not getting far." Jack and Max pursued Eduardo, their footsteps echoing off the rock walls. Max barked sharply, his powerful legs propelling him up the incline with ease. Eduardo glanced over his shoulder and fired a wild shot. "Stay back," he yelled. The bullet ricocheted off the rocks, but Jack kept advancing. "Give it up, Eduardo. You're done." Eduardo stumbled, losing his balance. He slipped on loose gravel and fell hard, dropping his pistol. Max lunged forward, pinning him to the ground. Jack approached, his rifle trained on the cartel leader. Eduardo's defiant expression crumbled as he realized he was surrounded. "You should have walked away," Jack said coldly. Eduardo spat in frustration. "You think this changes anything? The syndicate won't stop because of you." "Maybe," Jack replied. But you won't be around to see it. As Jack's squad secured, Eduardo, his lieutenant, who had survived the ambush, approached with his hands raised. Wait, the lieutenant said. I have information. I can help you. Dan aimed his rifle at the man. Why should we trust you? I know where the last of their supply routes are, the lieutenant explained. Give me protection, and I'll give you everything you need to finish the syndicate. Jack considered the offer. It could be a trap, but if the intel was real, they could dismantle the cartel's remaining operations. Fine, Jack said. But if you're lying, you won't live to regret it. I'm not lying, the man insisted. Sheriff Walker's convoy arrived at the canyon minutes later. Deputies took Eduardo and the surviving cartel soldiers into custody. Well, I'll be damned, Walker said, shaking his head. You brought the whole operation down. Just doing what needed to be done, Jack replied. Walker nodded. With Eduardo in custody and the intel from his lieutenant, we'll be able to finish off the rest of the cartel in this region. Good, Jack said. It's time to put an end to this. As the deputies loaded Eduardo into a transport vehicle, Jack and his team stood on the canyon ridge, watching the first hints of dawn break over the horizon. Dan clapped Jack on the shoulder. We did it, Jack. It's over. For now, Jack replied. But if anyone comes back looking for trouble, we'll be ready. Max barked in agreement, his tail wagging as he stood proudly beside his master. The squad began the journey back to the ranch, knowing they had finally secured their home and their future. The convoy rolled slowly back to the ranch as dawn broke over the desert horizon. The air was calm, but the tension in Jack's mind hadn't fully lifted. Eduardo Cortez was in custody, and his operation had been crippled. But Jack knew the syndicate still had resources and loyalists scattered across the region. Dan, Falcon, Harris drove beside Jack, both men lost in thought. Think this is really over? Dan finally asked. Not yet, Jack replied. We hit them hard, but there's still enough of the network left to regroup if we let our guard down. Dan sighed. Well, if they come back, they won't catch us by surprise again. Exactly, Jack said. We need to finish this while we have the upper hand. When they reached the ranch, Emma met Jack and Dan near the hangar with new intel. She had continued monitoring drone footage from the pursuit last night. Dad, you need to see this, she said, guiding them to the control station. The drone had captured footage of a hidden compound deep in the mountains, far from the routes they had scouted. Trucks and armed men were moving supplies into an underground facility. This has to be one of their last strongholds, Emma explained. It's remote and heavily guarded. Dan whistled. Looks like they've been stockpiling weapons there. If we don't hit it soon, they'll regroup faster than we thought. Jack nodded. Then we strike fast. Get the team together. By noon, the squad gathered near the airstrip for a final briefing. Sheriff Walker arrived with his deputies, ready to support the mission. You guys find trouble like it's your job, Walker joked as he looked at the drone footage. It's not trouble, Jack said. It's cleanup. As the squad prepared to move out, an unexpected visitor arrived. Carlos, the former cartel scout who had helped them earlier. He walked toward Jack, raising his hands in a show of peace. Carlos, Jack said, surprised. Didn't think I'd see you again. I couldn't leave without giving you a warning, Carlos said. Eduardo wasn't just stockpiling weapons. He's got something bigger planned at that compound. Something the syndicate doesn't want you to find. What are we talking about? Dan asked, narrowing his eyes. High-grade explosives, Carlos revealed. They were planning to sabotage major infrastructure. Roads, bridges. It was their fallback plan if things went south. Jack's expression hardened. Thanks for the warning. You might have just saved a lot of lives. Carlos nodded. I'm leaving town after this. I've had enough of this life. Good luck, Jack said. You've earned your fresh start. The mission began at dusk. Jack and his team approached the hidden compound, using the terrain for cover. Emma guided the drone overhead, marking patrol routes and entry points on their tablets. Guards are switching shifts, she reported. You've got a window to move in. Dan led a small team toward the main entrance while Jack and Max flanked from the east. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Hawk's voice came over the radio. Jack, we've got a problem, Hawk said, his tone tense. They've got automated turrets hidden near the main gate. One of them just opened fire. Jack swore under his breath. Everyone hold position. Emma, can you disable those turrets? I'll try, Emma said, furiously typing on her tablet. It'll take a few minutes. We don't have a few minutes, Dan muttered as bullets ricocheted off nearby rocks. Stay low, Jack said. We'll draw their fire until Emma can take them offline. Max darted ahead, using the terrain to stay hidden. He alerted Jack to a small access tunnel leading toward the compound's eastern wall. Good boy, Jack whispered. This might be our way in. With Emma's help, the team moved into position, neutralizing the turrets and entering the compound under cover of darkness. Inside the compound, Jack's squad encountered heavy resistance. Eduardo's remaining forces had fortified the interior, and a familiar face emerged from the shadows. Eduardo's top lieutenant. Did you really think we'd just let you walk in here? The lieutenant sneered. We're not here to walk. We're here to finish you, Jack replied coldly. The lieutenant raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Max lunged from the side, knocking him to the ground. The squad quickly neutralized the remaining guards in a brutal firefight. Compound's clear, Dan reported. We've got control. Emma guided the drone inside the facility, scanning for the explosives Carlos had warned them about. Her voice came through the radio, urgent and tense. Dad, I found it. There's a cache of C4 near the central storage area. Jack and Dan moved quickly, locating the explosives. They disarmed the detonators and secured the area. This could have done a lot of damage, Dan said, shaking his head. Not anymore, Jack replied. As the team cleared the compound, Sheriff Walker's deputies intercepted a final radio transmission from one of the cartel's senior operatives. The message was frantic and broken. They're done, Walker confirmed. We've cut off their last supply routes and taken their leaders. The syndicate's finished in this area. Jack exhaled slowly. It was over. As dawn broke over the desert, the team stood together outside the compound. They had dismantled the cartel's operation piece by piece and secured peace for the region. Dan clapped Jack on the back. Looks like retirement's gonna be peaceful again. Let's hope it stays that way, Jack replied with a small smile. Max barked in agreement, wagging his tail as Emma scratched behind his ears. For the first time in weeks, Jack allowed himself to relax. The fight was over, and this time, it was for good. The destruction of Eduardo's compound marked the end of the cartel's grip on the region. With their leaders captured or neutralized, and their supply lines severed, the once powerful syndicate collapsed in a matter of days. Sheriff Walker and federal agents took over the cleanup operations, ensuring no remnants of the cartel could reorganize. At the ranch, peace slowly returned. Jack stood on the airstrip at sunrise, the horizon glowing in shades of amber and gold. For the first time in weeks, there were no gunshots, no threats, and no urgent radio calls. Dan, Falcon, Harris joined him, sipping coffee from a metal thermos. Hell of a fight, Jack. But we won. Jack nodded slowly. It wasn't just us. It was everyone. Emma, the team, the community. This place means something to all of us. Dan chuckled. Think you'll finally get some rest now? We'll see, Jack replied with a grin. Later that morning, 2 black SUVs pulled into the driveway. A tall woman in a dark suit stepped out, accompanied by another agent. Emma, standing near the hangar, waved Jack over. Who's that? She asked. Probably here to tie up loose ends, Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag as he walked over to greet the agents. Mr. Henderson, the woman said, flashing her credentials. I'm Agent Lauren Taylor. I wanted to personally thank you for what you and your team accomplished here. We've been monitoring cartel activity for years, but you took down one of the most dangerous networks in the region. Just protecting my home, Jack replied. We could use people like you, Taylor said. If you're ever interested in working with us, there's a place for you on our task force. Jack shook his head. I appreciate the offer, but I've had enough of that life. My place is here now. Taylor smiled. Fair enough. Just know you have allies if you need them. With a final handshake, the agents left the ranch. Jack watched their vehicles disappear down the road, feeling a sense of closure. Word of the squad's victory spread quickly, and within days, neighbors began arriving at the ranch to offer their thanks. Trucks loaded with lumber, tools, and food rolled in, as families pitched in to help rebuild the damaged fences and structures. "Couldn't have done it without you, Jack," an older neighbor named Bill said, shaking his hand. "You've inspired all of us to stand up for ourselves." "It wasn't just me," Jack replied. "We did this together." Dan smirked from a distance. "Careful, Jack. You keep giving speeches like that, and they'll want you to run for mayor." "Yeah, not happening," Jack chuckled. Emma worked tirelessly alongside the community, painting the new ranch sign she had designed. It read, "Henderson Ranch, Home of the Brave." When she showed it to Jack, he smiled proudly. "Looks perfect," he said. Max barked happily as Emma scratched behind his ears. "This place finally feels safe again," Emma said softly. "It is," Jack reassured her. "And as long as we stick together, it'll stay that way." A few days later, Sheriff Walker returned with news about Eduardo Cortez. "Eduardo won't be causing any more trouble," Walker said. "He's locked up, and the feds have enough evidence to put him away for life." Jack crossed his arms. "Good. That's where he belongs." Walker nodded. "You did something most people wouldn't dare. You gave this whole region a fighting chance." "We all did," Jack replied. "And we'll keep fighting if we have to." Walker tipped his hat. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But I'm glad to know you've got our back." Later that evening, Jack and Emma sat by the fire pit near the airstrip. Stars sparkled overhead, and the air was filled with the comforting hum of crickets. Max lay at their feet, content and watchful. "Dad, I've been thinking," Emma began, her voice hesitant. "About what?" Jack asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "I want to learn how to fly," she said, meeting his eyes. "I want to follow in your footsteps." Jack's eyes widened slightly, but then he smiled. "You sure about that?" "Yeah. After everything we've been through, I know I can handle it," Emma replied confidently. Jack nodded. "All right. I'll teach you. But flying's not just about skill. It's about responsibility. You'll need to stay sharp." "I can handle it," Emma said with a grin. "You'll see." "Good," Jack said, feeling a swell of pride. The next morning, Dan and the other squad members prepared to leave the ranch. They had stayed to help rebuild but knew it was time to return to their own lives. Dan shook Jack's hand firmly. "If you ever need us again, just say the word." "Same to you," Jack replied. The bikers revved their engines, and the convoy rolled out with a roar of camaraderie and gratitude. Emma waved as they disappeared over the hill. "They'll be back to visit," Jack said, sensing her mixed emotions. "Yeah," Emma agreed. "They're family now." Weeks passed, and the ranch settled into a peaceful routine. Jack continued repairing old planes, Emma practiced flying under his guidance, and the fields flourished again. Max, ever vigilant, patrolled the property but no longer barked in fear of unseen threats. Neighbors visited often, bringing supplies and sharing stories of how the events at the ranch had inspired them to stand strong against criminal influences. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Jack stood at the edge of the airstrip, reflecting on everything that had happened. "We did it, Max," he said softly. The dog barked in agreement, his tail wagging. Emma joined him, holding the ranch's new sign in her hands. Together, they mounted it at the entrance to the property. "Welcome home," Jack said with a smile.